Hello and welcome to TVB News. The government has pushed back its plan to charge residents for rubbish disposal from the end of the year to April next year. Secretary for Environment and Ecology Tse Chin-wan said this after gathering opinions from frontline cleaners. As Sharon Tang reports, a Legislative Council panel will discuss the proposed legislation on Friday.
For years, the administration has proposed the polluter pays principle by quantity-based waste charging and recycling. The original plan was, starting at the end of the year, residents will have to use designated garbage bags for disposal, and the bags come with a charge of between 30 cents and $11. In his latest interview with the press, Secretary for Environment and Ecology Tse Chin-wan noted the scheme has been postponed until April 1st, 2024. He said the government has listened to a lot of comments and found them reasonable. An industry representative welcomes the move and explained what would happen if the government went ahead with the charging scheme by the end of this year.
As the Christmas time and Chinese New Year is approaching, seasonal parties, the amount of trash is really a lot, and we have to arrange more workers to deal with that. Also, there's a labor shortage that we cannot cope with.
Still, environmental group The Green Earth thinks the postponement shows the government doesn't seem to care. Earlier, the government was looking for contractors to produce designated garbage bags. The plan failed because the bidding price was too high. The Environment Secretary noted after the new tendering that some of the costs have been cut by half. He's confident contractors will be capable of making sufficient garbage bags. Also, Tse noted there will be a 6-month buffer when the scheme takes effect. Public housing, village houses, and the so-called 3-nil buildings, those without owners' corporations, residents' organizations, or property management companies, will be provided with the designated garbage bags. During that period, law enforcement officers will issue warnings to members of the public who violate the law. When the 6-month period is over, offenders will be subject to a $1,500 fine. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
U.S. President Joe Biden landed in London on Sunday night as he began a 3-nation trip that will see him attend a NATO summit in Lithuania. While in the UK, Biden will look to deepen his relationships with King Charles and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak during separate meetings. Daniel Rao tells us more.
US President Joe Biden travelled to 10 Downing Street today to hold a meeting with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, their 5th in as many months. It is Biden's first visit to Downing Street as US President. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said the two leaders will share notes ahead of the NATO summit in Lithuania, which gets underway on Tuesday and will be dominated by the Ukraine crisis. Ahead of the trip, Biden urged caution for now on Ukraine's drive to join NATO. He said the alliance could get drawn into the war with Russia due to NATO's Mutual Defense Pact. Biden's visit also comes days after he agreed to send controversial US cluster munitions to Ukraine. Cluster munitions are prohibited by more than 100 countries, including the United Kingdom, due to their threat to civilian populations. However, the White House National Security Advisor downplayed the disagreement over cluster munitions. Sullivan said Prime Minister Sunak and President Biden are on the same page strategically on Ukraine. The US leader will hold talks with King Charles at Windsor Castle today. They are to discuss how to help boost private investment to combat climate change, a threat both leaders say is existential. Sullivan said Biden hopes to deepen his personal relationship with the British monarch. An analyst stated that Biden's meeting with Charles will echo a tradition the late Queen Elizabeth II was keen on.
The Queen met and had long-standing dialogues and meetings with 13 of the 14 US presidents. And it was felt, a lot of the writing and the commentary is that by the end of it, it was seen even from the US as the great superpower, but it was seen as advantageous for a president to be pictured next to the Queen. Charles is an important figure in the world of green and climate energy. He's a very familiar face, so I think there's no disadvantage from a US president being photographed next to him.
Dunnerell, TV News.
Britain's public service broadcaster, the BBC, is wrapped up in another scandal which could lead to a police investigation. A presenter has been suspended after allegations that he paid a 17-year-old girl to perform in sexually explicit photos and videos. The BBC is reporting the story, but not naming the employee, causing speculation about who it is that is under investigation. David Garrett has more.
In the UK, for the second time in a dozen weeks, the organisation that delivers the news to the people is in the news. 4 months ago, BBC Sport's Gary Lineker was suspended for criticising the government's asylum policy on Twitter. He was reinstated in a U-turn as the organisation struggled to get to grips with its own guidelines. Now, a different unnamed high-profile presenter is suspended. This scandal could lead to a criminal investigation. The Sun newspaper claimed a BBC employee paid a girl $45,000 for sexual photos over a 3-year period beginning when she was 17. Although reporting the story, the BBC is not naming the person under suspicion, even though they know his identity, thus forcing some male BBC celebrities to publicly deny any suggestion of involvement. The public service broadcaster has asked the police to investigate.
It looks as though we're reaching a point where inevitably the name will come out, because given the evidence that we understand that is now available, then it seems extremely likely that the police will arrest and interview this person, and in due course it looks likely that they'll be charged.
The age of sexual consent in Britain is 16, but under another law, it's a crime to make or possess indecent images of anyone under 18. The tabloid that first reported the story quoted the girl's mother as saying that the male broadcaster has been paying for the images for the last 3 years. She says her young daughter spent the money on an illegal drug habit. The mother, who has not been named by media, complained to the BBC in May, but the Star remained on air.
It does call into question the ethics, the investigations, how long these things take, and the BBC, but also other broadcasters, do need to get a grip.
The BBC is funded by a public licence fee set by the government. Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser held talks with the Director General of the BBC about what she called a deeply concerning allegation. The BBC is now said to be investigating swiftly and assisting the police. David Garrett, TVB News.
The Netherlands' longest-serving Prime Minister Mark Rutte will leave politics before the end of the year. The 56-year-old has decided not to run again as leader of the VVD party. He said he will leave politics when a new cabinet takes office after elections. His government collapsed on Friday after a row with coalition partners over his immigration policy. Rutte has been Dutch leader for 13 years and is now head of a caretaker government with a date for the election to be decided. The vote will likely be in November. In the U.S. state of New York, a woman died after being swept away by floodwaters while trying to evacuate her home. Heavy rain spawned extreme flooding in New York's Hudson Valley, swamping roadways and forcing road closures. Much of the rest of the northeast U.S. began bracing for potentially punishing rain. As the storm moved east, the National Weather Service extended flash flood warnings into Connecticut and Massachusetts. Forecasters expect as much as 12 centimeters of rain in some areas. Rescue teams were attempting to retrieve the body of the woman, who was in her 30s. 2 other people escaped. The force of the flash flood dislodged boulders, which rammed the woman's house and damaged part of its wall. In Beijing, President Xi Jinping and Solomon Islands Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare today announced the establishment of a comprehensive strategic partnership. Sogavare's first appointment was a meeting with Premier Li Qiang at the Great Hall of the People, where he attended an official welcoming ceremony. On a week-long trip funded by Beijing, Sogavare will open the nation's embassy, meet Chinese companies, and visit Jiangsu and Guangdong. Sogavare came to power in 2019, switching the nation's diplomatic ties from Taipei to Beijing. The visit highlights the accelerating contest between China and the U.S. for influence in the South Pacific. Xi and Sogavare met in the afternoon. China and the Solomon Islands signed 9 diplomatic agreements, including an implementation plan for the 2023-2025 on police cooperation. Welcome back. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Yevgeny Prigozhin have met in Moscow, the Kremlin spokesman said. Dmitry Peskov said the 3-hour meeting took place on June 29th, 5 days after the Wagner private army leader Prigozhin staged a failed mutiny to dislodge Russia's military elite. Wagner's fighters have been at the forefront of Russia's war with Ukraine, with Prigozhin thought to have exiled himself in Belarus soon after he abandoned the rebellion. This, as Russia's most senior general, who was targeted by the Wagner Group, today made his first public appearance since the incident. Nazvi Karim has more.
This is the Russian Armed Forces Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, listening to a report about Ukrainian missile attacks, a routine meeting of military elite, if not for the fact that this was the man targeted by Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner private army, during the failed mutiny on June 24th. It's Gerasimov's first public appearance after Prigozhin and his fighters abandoned a march to Moscow to topple defense leaders in favor of exile in Belarus. Showing Gerasimov issuing orders to top generals is Moscow's way of saying it has well and truly moved on from the aborted rebellion and is fully focused on tackling Ukraine's counteroffensive. A counteroffensive that so far appears to be bogged down, with Ukrainian military officials admitting progress has been slower than expected. Gerasimov heard reports about the shooting down of 4 missiles, allegedly from Ukraine, 1 over the Crimean Peninsula that Russia annexed in 2014, and 3 over the Russian border towns of Rostov and Bryansk. Ukraine says its forces don't target areas beyond the front lines of the war, though they consider Crimea fair game. Kyiv's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar was reported to have said such attacks are key achievements. Ukraine said 4 people died and 11 were injured in the frontline town of Orikhiv in Zaporizhia during the distribution of humanitarian aid. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, meanwhile, was with Polish President Andrzej Duda in the western city of Lutsk to commemorate a dark period in relations between the two countries. A church service was held to mark the anniversary of the Volhynia massacre of Polish people by Ukrainian nationalists during the Second World War. Historians say tens of thousands of Poles were killed. Up to 12,000 Ukrainians died in retaliatory attacks. It was the subject of a public row between Poland and Ukraine earlier this year, but Warsaw remains staunchly behind Kiev in their war with Russia, with both leaders saying their peoples are now united. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
And locally, the ground gave way at the Man-Kam-To control point, forcing Immigration and Customs to suspend clearance services. The crossing has been closed to all traffic, and the Transport Department said travelers need to take northbound coaches to depart Hong Kong via the Hung Yun Wai control point. A civil engineer said the subsidence could have been caused by worn-out underground pipes. Memo Sangai with more.
At mainland side of the Man-Kam-To control point, the subsidence area is covered up, while trucks and cranes can be seen performing construction and maintenance work. This photo shows the damage caused by the subsidence, road with a massive V-shaped crack and tilted inspection booths. According to the Shenzhen's Office of Port of Entry and Exit, the incident happened on Sunday evening. Authorities then suspended inbound travelers and vehicle crossing services at the checkpoint out of safety concerns. Signs have been put up by the police near the Man-Kam-To control point, warning drivers about the incident. Owing to the subsidence, the control point cross-boundary coach service has been changed. Travelers need to depart the city via the Hung Yun Wai checkpoint, with the coach frequency being adjusted from every 30 minutes to 45 minutes. An ex-president of the Hong Kong Institution of Engineers said there are usually pipes under the roads. He said the incident could have been caused by worn-out pipes, damaged by storm or sewage drains. He added it would take about 2 to 3 weeks to repair the pipes as well as the roads and structures. Memo Sanai, TVB News.
A survey found more than 10% of Hong Kong students showed symptoms of internet gaming disorder or gaming addiction. Jackie Lin has more on researchers' suggestions on how to help these young people.
Between June and December last year, the Chinese University of Hong Kong and Hong Kong College of Technology surveyed more than 2,700 students from 4 secondary and 6 primary schools. 42% of respondents admitted they binge-watch online videos for at least 5 hours. 32% spent long hours playing video games. The most serious case gamed 90 hours non-stop. Researchers said it's a habit likely to have developed during the pandemic when schooling moved online.
During COVID, parents doesn't notice students studying and also gaming at the same time. So after develop their gaming habits, some of cases didn't go to toilets, they didn't bath. Most important thing is the children-parents relationship will get worsened.
Some 12% of respondents also showed signs of internet gaming disorder or gaming addiction. 1/3 are female. Nearly 200 gaming addicts are primary students. Around half of the pupils surveyed are also found to display moderate to very serious symptoms of anxiety or depression.
If they have mental health problems, they are more likely to use gaming, internet gaming, to avoid that stress.
With a month-long summer holiday around the corner, researchers said parents should help children plan their free time constructively. More than half of the respondents said they are considering or are willing to seek counseling or social worker services to facilitate communication with their parents on their gaming habits. But researchers said as resources for professional support in the community now are not enough, they urged the government to train up more relevant professionals to help. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
That's the news. Pearl Magazine is up shortly. Bye for now.